Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going beyond the headlines. You know, those attention-grabbing, scary stories about cybercrime and online fraud. Yeah, today we're going to try and really understand what's going on.
It's going to be fascinating.
It really is. And to help us with this, we have the insights of Amit Dubey, who's a cybersecurity expert. He's actually seen the impact of these crimes firsthand. We're not talking theory here. We're going to hear about real people and how their lives have been affected by scams.
It's not just about those theoretical threats that we hear so much about. It's about the real-world impact.
Yeah. Have you ever wondered, what a cybercrime investigator's day is actually like?
Oh, absolutely. It's a world that most of us can only imagine.
Right. And I think Amit's perspective is going to be so valuable here because he's been on the front lines. He's seen it all.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that Amit really highlighted was the idea that cybercrime has become almost like a new form of global warfare.
global warfare.
Okay. We're talking about data as a battleground.
Oh, it is a battleground.
Yeah, where control over information is just as powerful as, controlling physical territory.
That sounds intense. Data as a battleground. Can you give us a concrete example of what that looks like in the real world?
Sure, let's think about China for a second.
Okay.
They're actively working to build what Amit calls a closed internet ecosystem.
A closed ecosystem.
Yeah, so basically they're creating their own versions of apps and platforms that many of us use every single day. Instead of WhatsApp, think WeChat. Instead of Google or Bing, they have their own search engines, their own social media platforms. And all of this is designed to keep data within China's borders.
Oh, so it's like a digital fortress.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And, it's not just about protecting data. It's also about controlling it.
So why is it so important for them to keep all this data inside their borders? What's the advantage?
Control. Imagine a country having access to everything you do online. What you read, what you watch, what you buy, even who you talk to.
It's a little creepy when you think about it.
It is. Right. And that's a huge amount of power. Now think about that on a personal level. We're all shaped by the data we consume, right? What we see online influences our views, our beliefs, even our actions. So what happens when that data is manipulated?
That's a scary thought.
It is, right? Think about elections, for example, or even just the everyday news that you read. If someone can control that information, they can influence you in really powerful ways.
It's almost like mind control.
It can be. You'd think with all this talk about cybersecurity that only the naive would fall for these scams, or, people who just aren't that tech savvy. But what Amit has seen is that the reality is very different.
It's not just about being tech savvy.
No, not at all. One of the most surprising things he told us about was a case involving a woman who was an IIT graduate.
Wait, IIT as in one of the top engineering schools?
Exactly. One of the most prestigious institutions in India.
So this is someone who's supposed to be brilliant.
Right. You would think they would be able to see through these scams, but she ended up losing a significant amount of money to a romance scam.
A romance scam. An IIT graduate. You're kidding me. How is that even possible?
Well, that's the thing. These scammers are incredibly skilled at what they do. They're experts in emotional manipulation. They exploit our desires for love, connection, and security. They build relationships, they gain your trust, and then when you're most vulnerable, they strike.
It's like they're playing with people's emotions.
They are, and they're very good at it.
Mm.
In this particular case, the scammer pretended to be a successful businessman living in the UK. He showered her with attention, affection, even gifts. And eventually he convinced her to invest in a fake business venture.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And it really highlights the point that anyone can be vulnerable to these scams. It's not about intelligence or technical skills. It's about understanding the psychology behind these scams.
So we need to be aware of the emotional tactics that these scammers use.
Absolutely. Amit also shared another story that really drives this point home. It was a case where a driver convinced his boss, who was an IAS officer.
An IAS officer. We're talking about a very high-ranking government official here.
Exactly. Someone who's supposed to be intelligent and discerning. But he fell for a click-for-money scheme. The driver convinced him to click on links that promised easy money.
Wait, if someone in that position could be tricked, then it really does show that anyone can be vulnerable.
That's exactly what Amit wanted to emphasize. These scammers prey on what makes us human. They exploit our cognitive biases. Those are the mental shortcuts that our brains take to simplify decision-making.
So our brains are actually wired to make us vulnerable in some ways.
In a way, yes. For example, we have a tendency to trust authority figures or to believe things that confirm our existing beliefs. Scammers know this and they use it to their advantage.
So it's not enough to just focus on the technical aspects of cybersecurity. We also need to understand the psychological tactics that these scammers use.
Exactly. It's about being aware of our own vulnerabilities and the ways in which our minds can be tricked.
So being aware of ourselves is one way to protect ourselves.
It is. And unfortunately, what Amit has seen is that scammers often target people who are already the most vulnerable.
That's awful.
It is. He told us about one scam that ended up defrauding people out of over 3,700 crore rupees.
3,700 crore. That's billions of dollars.
Exactly. And many of the victims were people with lower incomes, people who were desperate to find a way to improve their financial situation.
So they were already struggling.
They were. And the scammers lured them in with promises of unrealistic returns on their investments. Many of them even took out loans to participate, hoping to finally get ahead financially.
So instead of getting ahead, they ended up losing even more.
Exactly. They lost everything. It's a really tragic situation.
It sounds like the emotional toll of these scams must be immense.
It is. And it highlights the ethical implications of these crimes. These scammers are knowingly targeting those who are most likely to be harmed by their actions.
So there's a real moral dimension to this issue.
There is. And it's something that we need to talk about more. It's easy to get caught up in the technical details of these scams. But we also need to remember that there are real people whose lives are being destroyed by these crimes. It's not just about money. It's about the erosion of trust, the feeling of violation, and the long-lasting emotional scars that these scams can leave behind.
It all sounds pretty doom and gloom. But Amit didn't just share these stories to scare us. He also walked us through some of the real-life cases he's investigated. And let me tell you, these cases are straight out of a crime drama.
Yeah, he really is like a digital Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
One case involved a journalist who received what appeared to be a suicide note. Amit had to use his digital detective skills analyzing emails, Facebook posts, anything he could get his hands on to try to figure out what was going on.
So was he able to save her?
He was. But here's where it gets really interesting. It turned out that the suicide attempt was actually a cover for a blackmail scheme orchestrated by the victim's own boyfriend.
Wow. Talk about a plot twist. So not only are these scams getting more sophisticated, but the motives are getting more complex as well.
Exactly. And then there was the case of a supposed Dubai businessman who was actually a wanted criminal from the Nalanda gang.
The Nalanda gang?
Yeah, they're notorious for their elaborate scams. Amit explained how these gangs operate across borders, using technology to hide their identities and make their operations seem legitimate.
So it's like a global network of criminals.
It is, and they're becoming increasingly sophisticated. It's really quite alarming.
I have to admit, I'm a little terrified now.
I understand. But the good news is that there are people like Amit who are working tirelessly to fight back against these criminals. And he's going to share some really valuable tips with us on how we can protect ourselves.
Okay, good. Because I'm ready to start taking this seriously.
Okay.
But on a more serious note, it's really incredible how Amit is able to use technology to track these criminals down. It must be really rewarding to know that your work is making a real difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. What's fascinating about these cases is that they really highlight the human element behind all the data. Each case is about real people whose lives have been turned upside down. It's not just about ones and zeros.
So even in this digital world, it's still about people.
It always is.
So after hearing all of this, it's clear that we need to be taking this seriously. But what can we actually do to protect ourselves? Do we all need to become cybersecurity experts?
Not at all. Amit actually stressed that it's not about being a tech whiz. It's about understanding the core vulnerabilities that these scammers exploit.
Okay, so what are some of those core vulnerabilities?
Yes, he actually talked a lot about call forwarding scams as an example.
Call forwarding scams? Okay, I'm not sure I'm familiar with those. How do they work?
Basically, they'll call you, often pretending to be from your bank or a service provider, and they'll say they need to verify your account.
Oh, I've gotten calls like that before.
Right. And they'll ask you to dial a specific code on your phone, claiming it's for security purposes. But what you're actually doing is enabling call forwarding, which allows them to intercept your calls and potentially gain access to your personal information.
Oh, so they trick you into giving them access.
Exactly. And they often use very convincing language and tactics to make you believe that you're actually helping them.
So it's like they're turning you into an accomplice without you even realizing it.
Exactly. They're very clever.
Okay. So what else should we be aware of?
Well, another thing he talked about was the importance of being cautious about the apps that you install on your phone.
Okay.
You should never install anything that you don't fully understand, especially if it's from a source that you don't trust. And of course, the age-old advice still stands. Be wary of clicking on links, especially from unknown senders or in emails or messages that seem too good to be true.
Okay. Those are all good reminders. But is there anything else we can do to protect ourselves when we're online?
Amit actually mentioned a really interesting tool called Movie Armor.
Movie armor. What is that?
Well, it's a tool that analyzes links before you click on them.
Oh, that sounds useful.
Yeah, imagine having like a bodyguard for your browser. That's essentially what Movie Armor does. It checks links against a database of known malicious sites and alerts you if there's any danger.
That sounds like a lifesaver.
It can be. It's super user-friendly too, and you can find a link to it in the show notes.
Perfect. We'll definitely include that. Now let's talk about something that's probably on everyone's mind these days. Facebook and other social media giants. Most people understand that they collect your data to try and sell us stuff.
Right. Personalized ads and all that.
Exactly. But Amit suggests that their goals are much more insidious than that. He believes they're not just trying to sell products, they're actually trying to shape our desires and beliefs.
It's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and he actually pointed to Sundar Pichai's congressional testimony.
The CEO of Google.
Right, where he admitted that Google listens to and tracks its users.
Yeah, that caused quite a stir when it came out.
It did. It was all over the news. But how does this data collection actually translate into manipulating our thoughts and actions?
This is where AI comes into play.
Hey, okay.
Think about it. Every time you watch a video or click on a link, you're feeding the AI algorithms information about your preferences, your interests, your beliefs.
It's like we're training the AI without even realizing it.
Exactly. And these algorithms get incredibly good at predicting what you want to see, what you'll click on, and even what might influence your opinions.
It's a little creepy when you think about it.
It is. And they use this information to tailor the content that you see online.
So it's like they're creating a custom echo chamber for each of us.
In a way, yes. And that's why we often feel like we're constantly being bombarded with targeted ads and information that confirms our existing biases.
Is it like they're reading our minds?
It can feel that way. And
Yeah.
that brings us to a group that's particularly vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. Our kids.
Our kids. Why are they particularly vulnerable?
Well, they've grown up in this digital world. And it's hard to imagine their lives without social media. But that also means they're exposed to this constant stream of manipulation from a very young age, and they might not even realize it's happening.
So they're being influenced in ways that they're not even aware of.
Exactly. And Amit actually mentioned that influencer is now one of the top career aspirations for many young people. It makes you wonder what that says about the values that we're instilling in the next generation.
It's a really interesting point. It seems like social media has really shifted our priorities in a lot of ways. We're constantly bombarded with images of perfect lives leading to anxiety, depression, and this constant pressure to compare ourselves to others.
Right. And for young people whose brains are still developing, this can have a significant impact on their self-esteem and their overall well-being.
It's almost like social media is creating a generation of insecure and anxious individuals.
That's a concern that a lot of experts are raising. And Amit actually brought up a pretty controversial topic, China's 45-minute daily internet limit for kids.
Wow, that's pretty drastic.
It is. It's definitely a radical solution. But it does raise an important question. What responsibility do governments have in regulating technology to protect children?
That's a really good question. It's something that we should all be thinking about more seriously.
Absolutely. We need to start having these conversations now because the impact of technology on our kids' lives is only going to grow.
I agree. This whole conversation has really been eye-opening. We've gone from global data wars to deeply personal impacts of cybercrime and social media manipulation, all in just this first part of our conversation.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And I can't wait to dig even deeper in the next part of our deep dive into the world of cybercrime and digital ethics. We're going to explore some practical steps that we can take to protect ourselves and those we care about from these threats. So stay tuned.
It's going to be fascinating.
It really is.
It's fascinating to think about how much effort goes into trying to understand our minds. Like companies and governments invest huge amounts of resources into using data to predict our behavior, to try and influence our decisions.
Like you're saying, it's almost like a psychological arms race.
In a way, it is, right? They're constantly trying to hack our brains, so to speak. But shouldn't we be doing the same?
Wait, what do you mean?
I mean, shouldn't we be investing just as much effort into understanding how our own minds work so we can defend ourselves better?
That's a really interesting thought. Are you saying we need to become experts in psychology just to, browse the internet safely?
Not necessarily an expert, but having even just a basic understanding of how our minds work and how we're susceptible to manipulation can be really empowering.
Okay, I can see that. But how do we even begin to understand our own minds like that?
Well, Amit touched on this a lot. He emphasized that awareness is key. We need to be more mindful of the information we consume, the apps we use, even the choices that we make online. It's
Yeah.
not just about installing antivirus software or using a strong password. It's about developing that critical mindset.
Like, we need to have a healthy skepticism towards everything we see online.
Exactly. And a big part of that is recognizing the emotional triggers that make us vulnerable, like fear, greed, the desire for belonging, the need for approval. These are universal human emotions, and scammers exploit them ruthlessly.
So if we understand those vulnerabilities, we can start to build up our defenses.
That's the idea. And what's really interesting is that Amit said it's not always the people you might expect who fall for these scams.
Okay? What do you mean?
He completely shattered this stereotype that only the naive or the gullible get scammed. In his experience, he's seen victims from all walks of life, highly educated professionals, successful business people, even seasoned investors.
Like anybody can get tricked.
That's right. It's like that saying, it's not the fish you see that get caught, it's the fish that bite.
That's a great analogy. So in a way, we're all potential targets.
We are. And what's even more concerning is that these scammers are becoming increasingly sophisticated in their methods. They're using cutting-edge technology, psychological profiling, social engineering techniques to target their victims with laser-like precision.
So it's like they're running their operations like legitimate businesses.
That's a great way to put it. They're constantly innovating and refining their tactics.
Amit actually described one case where a scammer was able to gain access to a victim's bank account just by asking for their details,
Yeah.
like their account number and bank statements. How is that even possible?
It sounds unbelievable, right? But it happens. The scammer in this case convinced the victim that they were conducting a security check.
Oh, like they were from the bank.
Exactly. And people often want to be helpful, especially when they think they're dealing with someone in a position of authority.
Right. They want to do the right thing.
Exactly. And once the scammer had those details, they were able to drain the victim's account completely.
That's terrifying.
Yeah?
It's amazing how easily people can be manipulated, especially when they're caught off guard or under pressure.
That's why vigilance is so important. We should always be skeptical of unsolicited requests for personal information, even if they seem to be coming from a trusted source. And if there's ever any doubt, the best thing to do is to verify the request directly with the organization.
So don't just take their word for it.
Exactly.
That's it.
Double
Cool.
check, always. And one of the things that Amit talked about that was really disturbing was this trend of scammers targeting vulnerable populations.
Like who?
Like the elderly, people with lower incomes, people who are already experiencing financial hardship.
It's just awful to prey on people who are already struggling.
It's really predatory behavior. They offer this false hope of quick and easy financial gains. And sadly, these victims are often the least equipped to recover from those losses.
It's like they're kicking people when they're already down.
Exactly. And Amit actually mentioned a case that involved this 22-year-old who orchestrated a massive scam that defrauded people out of 3,700 crore rupees. The authorities actually found between 750 and 800 crore rupees in his bank account alone.
That's insane. It's hard to even comprehend that amount of money.
It's a mind-boggling sum, and it just goes to show how profitable these scams can be.
And how devastating the impact is on the victims.
Absolutely. These stories are a stark reminder that these scams aren't victimless crimes. They have real and lasting consequences for real people, and often the people who can least afford it.
It all feels so overwhelming. Like with the rise of technology and how easy it's making things for scammers, it almost feels like we're fighting a losing battle. What can we do to protect ourselves in this ever-evolving landscape of cybercrime?
I know it can feel that way, but it's important to remember that we're not powerless. The first step is to change our mindset. We need to stop thinking of ourselves as immune to these scams and start taking proactive steps to protect ourselves.
Okay, so what are some concrete steps that we can take?
Well, Emin had some really great practical advice. First and foremost, it's crucial to stay informed about the latest scams and the latest trends. Scammers are constantly coming up with new ways to trick people. So knowing their tactics is half the battle.
It's like we need to keep up with the latest fashions in cybercrime.
That's a great way to put it. Except in this case, staying fashionable could actually save you a lot of trouble.
I like that analogy. So stay informed. What else?
Be cautious about what you share online. The more information you put out there, personal details, financial information, even your location, the more ammunition you're giving these scammers.
It can be hard though, right?
No.
It feels like we're expected to share everything online these days.
I know, but it's worth thinking twice before posting that vacation photo or updating your relationship status.
Good point.
What else?
Well, of course, using strong and unique passwords for all your online accounts and enabling two-factor authentication whenever possible are essential steps.
Yeah, those are like cybersecurity basics, but
Yeah.
they're easy to forget or put off. I know, but they really can make a huge difference. It makes your accounts much harder for scammers to access, even if they somehow manage to get your password.
Okay, those are good reminders. So strong passwords, two-factor authentication, anything else?
Be wary of any unsolicited emails, phone calls, or text messages, especially those that ask for your personal information or try to urge you to click on a link. The ones that promise you some amazing deal or threaten dire consequences if you don't act immediately.
I know exactly what you mean. Those always set off alarm bells in my head.
And for good reason. They're often scams. It's better to be safe than sorry.
So if something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. And if, despite your best efforts, you do fall victim to a scam, Amit emphasized the importance of reporting it to the authorities right away.
Why is that so important?
Well, it can help to prevent others from falling victim to the same scheme, and it might even lead to the apprehension of the scammer.
So there is a chance of getting justice, even in this digital world.
There is. And, one of the most fascinating things that Amit talked about was the psychology of these criminals. It's both disturbing and fascinating to learn about their motivations and their tactics.
Yeah. Can you give us a little glimpse into the mind of a scammer? Like, what kind of person dedicates their life to deceiving others?
It's a complex question, and there's no one simple answer. But Amit, having interviewed countless scammers over the years, has developed this deep understanding of how they operate. And he said many of them are driven by this combination of greed, the thrill of the challenge, and perhaps most disturbingly, a lack of empathy for their victims.
It's hard to imagine having such a callous disregard for other people's well-being.
It is. He actually mentioned one scammer who boasted about making an average of 10 to 15 lakh rupees per month.
That's a lot of money.
It's a staggering amount, and it really is a testament to how profitable these scams can be. But there must be more to it than just money. What motivates someone to choose this path? Well, Amit shared a story about this one scammer who got caught running a whole network of fake bank accounts. He used these accounts to launder money from his victims.
So it's not just individuals, it's like a whole criminal enterprise.
That's a great way to put it. And what's really alarming is that these criminal organizations are becoming increasingly sophisticated and interconnected. They're using advanced technology to communicate, share information, and even recruit new members.
It's like a whole global network of criminals operating in the shadows.
It is. And it really highlights why this fight against cybercrime needs to be a global one. We need international cooperation, law enforcement agencies that are equipped to deal with these complex crimes, and perhaps most importantly, a public that is educated and empowered to protect themselves.
So it's not just about relying on the authorities to catch these criminals. It's also about taking responsibility for our own safety in the digital world.
Exactly. But how do we do that when these methods are constantly evolving? What's interesting is that many of these scammers exploit the same psychological vulnerabilities that are present in other forms of criminal activity. They prey on people's fears, their desires, their insecurities. The methods might be different, but the underlying psychology is often the same.
It's just like they're playing on our basic human instincts.
Exactly. Amit talked about one case where a scammer pretended to be a police officer in order to gain access to a victim's personal information.
Oh, wow. That's bold.
It is. He told the victim that he was investigating a fraud case and needed their cooperation to catch the criminals.
So the victim thought they were helping.
They did. And they readily provided their social security number, their bank account details, even their passwords.
It's amazing how easily people can be manipulated when they think they're dealing with a figure of authority.
That's right. It plays on our natural inclination to want to be helpful and to avoid getting into trouble.
So trust can be a dangerous thing.
It can be, Pareflet. Amit also mentioned a case where a scammer pretended to be a romantic suitor in order to gain a victim's trust.
Oh, those romance scams I've heard, those can be really devastating.
They can be. The scammer in this case showered the victim with compliments, gifts, promises of a future together, completely playing on their desire for connection and love.
It's really heartbreaking that people exploit those basic human needs.
It is. And it's a reminder that we need to be cautious about who we trust both online and offline.
And aware of those red flags that might indicate a scam.
Absolutely. And technology is actually making it easier than ever for these scammers to create fake identities and fabricate these believable stories. They can use social media to build these elaborate profiles. They can create fake websites that look incredibly real, and even use AI to generate these realistic sounding voices.
So it's like they're creating a whole alternate reality designed to deceive and manipulate their victims.
That's a really chilling way to put it. And as technology continues to advance, we can expect to see these scams become even more sophisticated and convincing. It's a constant cat and mouse game.
It's all very daunting.
Yeah,
But did Amit offer any solutions for fighting back?
He did. He believes we can fight back, but it's going to require a collective effort. He emphasized the importance of education and awareness. The more people understand about these tactics that scammers use, the less likely they are to fall victim.
So knowledge is power, even in the world of cybercrime.
Absolutely. He also advocated for stronger laws and regulations to deter criminals and to hold them accountable for their actions.
Yeah, stronger deterrence could make a big difference.
They could. And we also need law enforcement agencies that are equipped with the resources and training to investigate and prosecute these complex crimes. It's a specialized field that requires expertise and constant adaptation.
So it sounds like we need a multi-pronged approach, education, legislation, and law enforcement all working together. But what can we do as individuals right here, right now?
Well, aside from all those practical tips that we already discussed, Amit talked about the importance of critical thinking. And not just in the context of cybersecurity, but in all aspects of our lives.
Okay, critical thinking.
Yeah.
But how does that apply to staying safe online?
Well, it's about being more skeptical of all the information that we're constantly bombarded with, whether it's from the news, social media, even our own friends and family. We need to learn to question our assumptions, to evaluate the evidence, and to think for ourselves.
So don't just blindly trust everything that we see or hear.
Exactly. Pause and consider the source, the motives, the potential biases behind the information.
That's a good point. It's like we need to be more discerning consumers of information.
Exactly. And Amit actually mentioned that he often gives presentations at schools teaching students about the dangers of cybercrime and how to protect themselves.
Oh, that's great. I bet the kids love hearing from a real cybercrime expert.
They do. And he starts by asking them how they would go about remaining anonymous online.
That's a clever way to engage them.
It is. The students, eager to show off their tech skills, readily share their knowledge of VPNs, proxy servers, and all these techniques for masking their identity online.
They probably think it's cool to be able to hide online.
Right. But then Amit shifts the focus. He asks them about the potential dangers of anonymity, how it can be used to hide malicious activities, how it can make it harder to hold people accountable for their actions.
It's a good point. It's like a double-edged sword.
It is. And it's a powerful lesson in digital citizenship and the importance of responsible online behavior. It's not just about protecting ourselves. It's about creating a safer and more ethical online environment for everyone.
I like that digital citizenship.
Yeah.
It's a good way to frame it. But what's scary is that many young people just aren't aware of the potential consequences of their online actions. They think they're just having fun, but their actions can have real-world implications both for themselves and for others.
It's true. Amit shared a story about a group of teenagers who created this fake social media profile and used it to bully a classmate. They thought it was a harmless prank, but the victim was deeply hurt and even considered suicide.
Oh, wow. That's awful.
It is, and it's a reminder that words can have a profound impact whether they're spoken or written online.
It's a lesson we all need to learn. But with cyberbullying becoming increasingly common, how can we address this growing problem?
Amit believes that parents, educators, and tech companies all have a role to play.
So it's going to take a village.
It will. Parents need to have open and honest conversations with their children about online safety and responsible behavior. It's not just about setting screen time limits, it's about having those deeper conversations about digital ethics and empathy.
Right. It's about teaching them how to be good digital citizens.
Exactly. And educators need to incorporate digital citizenship into their curricula, teaching students about the importance of respect, responsibility, and critical thinking in the online world. And tech companies need to take responsibility for the platforms that they create.
So it's a shared responsibility.
It is. We all have a role to play in creating a safer and more ethical online world.
That's a really good point. But it's not just about protecting young people. Adults are also vulnerable to the negative effects of technology.
That's right. Amit talked about the potential dangers of social media addiction. He's seen countless cases where people's lives have been negatively impacted by their excessive use of social media. It's a growing problem that often goes unrecognized.
Social media addiction.
Uh-huh.
What are some of the signs that someone might have a problem?
He described one case where a young woman became so obsessed with getting likes and followers on Instagram that she completely neglected her studies, her job, even her relationships. She spent hours scrolling through her feed, constantly comparing herself to others and feeling inadequate.
It sounds like she lost herself in this online world.
She did. And, social media is designed to be addictive. It's constantly feeding us content that's engineered to keep us engaged. Whether it's positive or negative, it keeps us hooked.
It's like a digital slot machine, always promising the next hit of dopamine.
That's a great analogy. And this constant stimulation can have a profound impact on our mental health. It can fuel anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, body image issues, even suicidal thoughts. It's a serious problem that we shouldn't take lightly.
So what can we do about it? How can we break free from this cycle of addiction and reclaim our time and attention?
Well, Amit believes that we need to be more mindful of our social media use and set limits for ourselves. He recommends taking breaks, turning off notifications, engaging in other activities that bring us joy and fulfillment.
It's about finding that balance again.
Exactly. Not letting social media control our lives, but using it as a tool that serves our needs and our goals.
Right. Like anything else in life, moderation is key.
Exactly. And Amit is also a big proponent of what he calls digital detoxing,
Yeah.
taking a break from technology altogether for a period of time.
A digital detox. What are the benefits of doing that?
Well, it can be a fantastic way to reset our minds, to reconnect with ourselves and our loved ones, to rediscover the beauty of the offline world. It allows us to appreciate the simple things in life and to break free from this constant stimulation that we're bombarded with in the digital world.
That sounds refreshing. Like a mental cleanse.
It can be. But, with technology becoming increasingly integrated into our lives, how realistic is it to completely disconnect? It doesn't have to be a complete disconnect. Even small changes can make a big difference. You could try setting aside specific times each day to be completely tech-free, maybe during meals or an hour before bed. Whatever works for you and your family.
So it's about finding those pockets of time where we can disconnect and recharge.
Exactly. Even just for a few minutes each day can make a big difference.
But isn't there a risk of demonizing technology with this whole detox concept? After all, it's brought so much good to the world.
You're right. And Amit isn't anti-technology at all. In fact, he's incredibly passionate about the potential of technology to improve our lives. He just emphasizes the importance of using it consciously and intentionally rather than letting it use us.
It's about being in the driver's seat.
Exactly. And he shared this inspiring story about a group of students who used social media to organize a protest against climate change.
That's a great example of how technology can be a force for good.
It is. They were able to reach a wide audience, raise awareness about the issue, and even pressure their local government to take action.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether. It's about using it wisely and for the right purposes.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that technology is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or evil, depending on our intentions and our choices.
It's a powerful message. And speaking of power, one of the most concerning things that Amit talked about was the erosion of privacy in the digital age.
It's something that we often take for granted, but our privacy is under constant threat in this digital world. We're being tracked and monitored by tech companies, advertisers, and even governments. Our online activities, our location data, our purchasing habits, our social connections, it's all being collected and analyzed.
It's almost like we're living in a surveillance state, but instead of cameras on every corner, it's our own devices that are tracking us.
That's a powerful image. And, a lot of people say, well, I have nothing to hide, so why should I be worried about my privacy? But the problem is that this data can be used against us often without our knowledge or consent.
Okay, so how could it be used against us?
It can be used to manipulate our choices, to discriminate against us, or even to harm us. Amit shared a case where a woman was denied a loan because an algorithm determined that she was a high-risk borrower based on her social media activity.
You're kidding. So they were judging her based on her online posts.
She had posted about being unemployed and struggling to make ends meet, and the algorithm interpreted this as a sign of financial instability, even though her actual credit history might have been perfectly fine.
That's so unfair. It's like we're being judged by our digital footprints.
It is, and that's why it's so important to start taking steps to protect our privacy.
Okay, but how do we do that when it feels like our data is being collected everywhere we go online?
Well, there are actually quite a few things you can do. Amit stressed the importance of being more mindful about the information that you share online. Think twice before you post personal details, financial information, or even your location.
So it's about being more selective about what we choose to share.
Exactly. And he also recommends using privacy-enhancing tools such as VPNs and ad blockers.
Oh, okay. Those sound helpful. Can you explain how they work?
Sure. A VPN, or a virtual private network, encrypts your internet traffic and routes it through a secure server in another location. It makes it much harder for companies to track your online activity.
So it's like creating a secret tunnel for your data.
Exactly. And ad blockers prevent those annoying and often intrusive ads from popping up on websites and tracking your browsing history.
Yeah, I hate those ads. They're so distracting.
I know. And they're constantly collecting data about you. So using an ad blocker is a simple step, but it can make a big difference.
Okay, so VPNs, ad blockers. What else can we do?
It's also important to support organizations that are fighting for our digital rights.
Like, are there any specific organizations that you recommend?
Well, Amit mentioned the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF.
The EFF, I've heard of them.
They're a nonprofit organization that defends civil liberties in the digital world. They work to protect our privacy, our freedom of speech, and our right to access information.
It sounds like they're doing really important work.
They are. They're a great resource for anyone who wants to learn more about digital privacy and how to protect themselves online.
So check out the EFF. Got it. But you know what's frustrating is that so much of this stuff is buried in those long and confusing terms and conditions documents that nobody ever reads.
You're right. Most of us just click agree without really understanding what we're signing up for.
It can feel so overwhelming.
It can be. But Amit actually stressed the importance of taking the time to read those documents and to understand what we're agreeing to.
So it's about being informed consumers.
Exactly. Understanding the trade-offs that we're making when we use these online services. We might be getting convenience or entertainment in exchange for our data, but we need to be aware of what we're giving up.
Right. It's like any other transaction. We need to know what we're buying into.
Exactly. And, it can feel like we're stuck in this take it or leave it situation with these tech companies. But Amit believes that we need to start demanding better. We need to hold them accountable for their data practices and push them to develop products and services that respect our privacy.
So it's about using our power as consumers to demand change.
Exactly. And, there are already examples of this happening. Amit mentioned the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR.
The GDPR, I think I've heard of that. Wasn't that something that happened in Europe?
It was passed in 2018, and it's a groundbreaking law that gives individuals much more control over their personal data.
So what does it actually do?
It sets strict rules for how companies can collect and use our data, and it gives us the right to access, correct, and even delete our data.
So it's putting the power back in the hands of individuals.
It is, and it's a step in the right direction. And what's interesting is that other countries are actually starting to follow suit. So there's hope that we might see similar regulations implemented around the world.
That's a really encouraging sign. But with technology constantly evolving, is it even possible to stay ahead of these privacy threats?
It's definitely a challenge, but the good news is that there's a growing movement around the world to protect digital privacy. People are becoming more aware of the risks, and they're starting to demand change. It's a reminder that even in the face of these powerful tech companies and governments, we can make a difference. It's a challenge, but the good news is that there's a growing movement around the world to protect digital privacy. People are becoming more aware of the risks, and they're starting to demand change. It's a reminder that even in the face of these powerful tech companies and governments, we can make a difference.
That's inspiring. So it's not about being powerless, but rather about becoming informed and taking action. Speaking of action, Amit also talked about the importance of cybersecurity, protecting our computers, our networks, and our data from cyber attacks.
Yeah, he explained that cyber attacks are becoming increasingly common and sophisticated, and they can have a really devastating impact on individuals, businesses, and even entire countries.
Yeah. It's one thing to be scammed out of money, but it's a whole other level when entire systems are compromised.
Yep.
What kind of impact are we talking about here?
Well, he mentioned the WannaCry ransomware attack.
Oh, yeah. I think I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, it infected hundreds of thousands of computers around the world back in 2017.
That was a while ago. I vaguely remember that. What happened?
Well, basically, the attackers demanded a ransom in Bitcoin to unlock the infected computers.
Wow, so your whole computer system is held hostage.
Exactly. And many businesses and organizations felt like they had no choice but to pay the ransom just to get their systems back up and running.
Oh, wow, so they actually paid.
Many did, yeah. It caused massive disruptions and huge financial losses.
It's a reminder that these cyber attacks aren't just theoretical threats. They have real-world consequences, and we need to be taking them seriously.
Absolutely. And one important thing that Amit emphasized is that cybersecurity isn't just about technology, it's also about people.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
He explained that a lot of these cyber attacks are successful because they exploit human vulnerabilities, like phishing attacks, for example.
Phishing attacks. What are those?
Well, they trick people into clicking on malicious links or opening infected attachments. It's not a technical flaw, it's human error.
Oh, so it's about being aware of those tactics and not falling for those traps.
Exactly. He stressed the importance of being really cautious about the links that we click on the emails that we open. If something seems suspicious or too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, good advice for life in general.
Absolutely. But are there any specific things that we can do to make ourselves less vulnerable?
That's what I'm wondering.
Well, those cybersecurity basics we talked about earlier, using strong passwords and enabling two-factor authentication, are really effective in preventing unauthorized access to your accounts.
It's amazing how much of a difference those simple steps can make.
They really can. And Amit also talked about the importance of keeping our software up to date.
Oh yeah, those updates. They always seem to come at the worst time.
I know, but they often include security patches that fix vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit.
So it's not just about getting the new features, it's about protecting our devices.
Exactly. And enabling automatic updates is a great way to stay protected without having to think about it.
That's a great tip. Okay, so strong passwords, two-factor authentication, keep our software updated.
Got it. But even if we do all of that, is there still a chance that we could be targeted?
Unfortunately, yes. That's why Amit stressed that cybersecurity is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time fix. We need to be constantly vigilant and proactive.
So what else can we do?
He strongly recommends regularly backing up your important data.
Oh, yeah, backups. I always forget about those.
I know. But it's so important. If your computer gets infected or you have a hardware failure, you won't lose everything.
Good point. Backups are essential. What else?
He also recommends using a reputable antivirus software program. It can help to protect your computer from malware and other online threats.
So it's like having an extra layer of protection.
Exactly. And it's important to stay informed. Make it a habit to read articles or follow cybersecurity experts online. There are lots of great resources out there.
It can feel overwhelming, though, to keep up with all the latest threats. It can be, but staying informed is really important.
Okay, so be informed, be empowered, and be proactive.
Got it. So we talked about scams, we talked about cyber attacks. What else did Amit cover?
One of the other really important things he talked about was digital ethics.
Digital ethics, what is that?
Well, as technology becomes more and more powerful and more ingrained in our lives, it's crucial to think about the ethical implications of its use. It's not just about what we can do, but what we should do.
So what are some of those ethical dilemmas that we're facing in this digital age?
Well, one of the things he talked about was the development of autonomous weapons systems.
Autonomous weapons systems, like robots that can kill.
Essentially, yes. Machines that can make life or death decisions without any human intervention.
It sounds terrifying, like something out of a science fiction movie.
I know. But it's the reality that we're facing. And Amit believes that this is a really dangerous and unethical path to go down, and he's working to raise awareness about these risks.
It sounds like something we should be talking about more. We should. What are some other ethical concerns? Well, he's also concerned about the potential for AI to be used for mass surveillance, which could really erode our privacy and our civil liberties.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, isn't it? Like, how do we embrace the power of technology without sacrificing our freedoms?
It is a tough balance, and it's something that we as a society need to figure out. We need to have these conversations now before it's too late.
So we need to be thinking about the ethical implications of these technologies before they become too powerful.
Exactly. And what's encouraging is that there are so many people out there who are thinking deeply about these issues and working towards ethical solutions.
Oh, that's good to hear. Like who?
There are researchers, ethicists, policymakers, and even tech companies themselves who are really committed to responsible innovation.
It sounds like there's a growing movement towards a more ethical approach to technology.
There is, and it's really inspiring. But digital ethics isn't just about these big philosophical questions. It also applies to our everyday interactions online, how we treat each other, how we share information, how we conduct ourselves in digital spaces.
So it's about bringing those same values of respect, kindness, and integrity into the online world.
Absolutely. And it's about creating this digital culture where everyone feels safe and respected and empowered.
I love that vision. But is it really possible? Can we really create a more ethical digital world when there are so many forces pushing in the opposite direction?
It's definitely a challenge, but Amit is optimistic. He believes that we can create a better future if we work together.
So what can we do? What can we do to contribute to this vision?
Well, it starts with each of us, making conscious choices about how we use technology, treating others with respect online, speaking up against injustice. It's about being the change we want to see in the world.
It's about taking responsibility for our own actions and our own impact on this digital world.
Exactly. And Amit actually left us with this really thought-provoking question. If companies and governments are investing so much time and money into understanding our minds, shouldn't we be doing the same?
Wow, that's a great question. We're constantly being analyzed and categorized, but how well do we actually understand our own minds?
It's true. And Amit believes that we need to invest just as much effort into understanding our own cognitive biases or emotional triggers, the ways in which we're susceptible to manipulation.
So it's about developing that self-awareness as a form of protection.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. And in this digital age, understanding our own minds is one of the most important forms of protection we have.
That's such a valuable insight. And it brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of cybercrime, digital ethics, and the future of technology. It's been an incredible journey filled with so many fascinating insights and thought-provoking questions. I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
To my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration. Remember to check out the show notes for links to all the resources that we mentioned, including Amit Dubey's work and that handy tool, Movie Armor. And most importantly, share this information with your friends, family, and colleagues. Spreading awareness is one of the best ways to protect ourselves and each other in this ever-evolving digital world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe online.